This is Talking Mule Deer with your hosts Steve Belinda and Jodi Stemler. Talking Mule Deer takes you on a journey to learn more about the Mule Deer Foundation, mule deer and black-tailed deer biology and management, tips and tactics for hunting, conservation issues, and even features some of our corporate and celebrity partners. Now, let's start talking mule deer.
We are here at the Western Hunting and Conservation Expo here in Salt Lake City with Mike Lauder from Mule Deer Foundation and Randy Morrison, our Senior Regional Director out of California. Mike is the Director of Field Operations.
Hey guys, did we order this nice weather just for Jodi and I coming into town?
Absolutely.
Little warm and dry this year. It's a little bit better than the cold and snowy we had for the deer last year. But,
that's true. A year ago, we were feeding deer.
Yep, that's very
So
true.
this is what, the 12th Expo?
12th Expo.
Oh, man, I can't believe it's been a decade and a couple years already. I remember being at the second one. It's grown quite a bit.
Absolutely.
So you guys have been involved with the Mule Deer Foundation for a very long time. Tell me a little bit about how you got involved, how you got engaged. What about your passion for Mule Deer Foundation and mule deer in general?
I started years and years ago. I mean, mule deer being my passion and my family's passion, it was something that I didn't know any different. I grew up enjoying being outdoors with the family and hunting mule deer. And as I got older and got married and got a job and things like that, I found myself at a place in time where I could give something back, where I could give something back to the species that I'd enjoyed hunting and I wanted to take care of them. So I joined a committee, a Mule Deer Foundation committee, as a volunteer. I've held every position that you can hold. I was a chapter member, a chapter chairman, state chairman, and eventually, I guess they couldn't get rid of me, and they offered me a job as a regional director. And I spent 11 years as a regional director for the Mule Deer Foundation, raising money professionally for mule deer. So
was that all here in Utah, Mike?
Yes.
So, and that sounds like it's 20 years or so that you've been?
15 something like that. Well, if you count the volunteer time, about 18 years. Yeah. I mean, it's been a long time. And back when I was early in my career as a volunteer, as a regional director, I covered parts of California, New Mexico, Nevada, Oregon. I mean, we only had 3 or 4 of us that we covered a lot of banquets with just the guys we had. So.
But now we have regional directors in all 11 states, or
we have 12 regional directors right now, and all the western states have their own, and then we kind of take turns covering the eastern chapters.
Excellent.
So your role with the MDF is to oversight all those field directors and make sure that they're really going out and raising money and getting projects done and all the other things we need to do for mule deer conservation.
Using best practice. I had a pretty good program that was very efficient, that we raised a lot of money, and we kind of had a really good system, as does Randy. And at the point in which they promoted me to director of field operations, I was to share that with some of the new hires and encourage best practice, encourage positive attitude and volunteer recruitment and things of that nature. So it's been a wild ride. It's so cool to stand out here on the show floor and watch people. I mean, years ago, if somebody walked by wearing a mule deer hat, I gave it to them. Yeah. And now to see them on everybody's head and our logo everywhere and our organization doing so well, it's take a lot of pride in that.
Now, Mike, a little birdie whispered in my ear last night that Randy is your number one fundraiser. I think it was Randy that whispered in my ear.
Absolutely. I got to spread that around.
Randy does a great job.
So, Randy, tell us how you got involved with MDF and, what really drives you. What's your passion right now?
Well, like Mike, I started at an early age, came from a hunting family, went hunting with my father and grandfather before I could legally hunt in California.
They still hunt in California?
They still have deer in California.
Absolutely. We actually still have an awful lot of deer in
Blacktails,
California.
right?
There is about 450,000 deer in California. It's just that it's a great big state, and they're very spread out. And our deer numbers are down, but there's still an awful lot of deer. They're just hard to get to in many cases. But I started as a child hunting, developed a passion at a very early age to hunt. I love to hunt just about everything that is legal to hunt, but I'm a deer hunter at heart. That's what I love the most. And as a young man, I was very avid, very active, and harvested a lot of deer. And once I got into my 30s and 40s, I thought, it's time for me to start working towards the next generation so that they can enjoy the things that I enjoyed and my parents enjoyed and grandparents, because it's going on family hunting trips is something that I will remember my entire life, and there's some of the fondest memories that I have. So I joined a committee of a statewide deer association in California, became a chapter chair after that, and then got on that state organization's board of directors. And I was on their board of directors for 2 years, and an opportunity for a regional director for California for the Mule Deer Foundation came up, and I felt that I could be of more use and do more things as a regional director of the Mule Deer Foundation, a national organization, than I could as a board member of a state organization. So I came to work here with the Mule Deer Foundation in the very beginning of 2010, and we were kind of in a state of disarray at the time in California, and we've built that back to where we are now, actually raising the most money of any region in California or in the U.S. at the moment. But like I was telling Mike earlier, right now my state is ranked number 1, but frankly, I'd be happy if it was ranked number 3 or 4. And I made more money there next year than this year. So
yeah, well, congratulations.
It's all about
on
the organization.
Well, and that's the important part. So fundraising is, it's not just dollars for coming back to MDF. Obviously, that's important. We have to run an organization. But tell us a little bit about the chapter process and how you raise funds. What are banquets? How does that money then get back down onto the ground? Because that's where the rubber hits the road for Mule Deer.
Absolutely. Typically, any individual chapter that we have, which is made up completely of volunteers who give their time to our organization and to the species that they love, to raise money and to put that money on the ground, either locally or nationally, wherever it is most needed at the time. And a chapter will typically hold an annual fundraising banquet where we will have live auctions, silent auctions, raffles, games, all that are fun for the people to come and enjoy, and they are our primary source of funding. Once we raise that money, some of that money goes to feed the Mule Deer Foundation machine, which we cannot do the things that we do without having a well-oiled machine to do it. And the rest of that money is used for conservation. Each individual chapter is able to retain a portion of their net dollars to put towards approved projects within their state or even within their chapter area or local area if they choose to do so.
And that's what we call chapter rewards,
correct? That's what we call
Yep.
chapter rewards, and they can be up to 30% of a chapter's net proceeds that they have the first say-so as to which project that money gets spent on, and that's a substantial amount.
It's a nice perk to the chapter to have that, not saying that if they didn't have enough money to cover something, they could apply for national money as well. So the way the program works, you have 1 year to apply for your money as a chapter from the date of your banquet. If you exceed that, then it goes into the state fund, which means anybody else in the state from other chapters can then apply for that money as well. Well, by the 3rd year, then it goes back to national and is considered national money, which may go to a high-profile wildfire in Nevada or something of that nature.
So basically, the better we do locally,
yes,
the more chance we have to put that back on the ground for the local mule deer herds.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
it's based
awesome.
on efficiency. In the old days, the comments were always made, and we can all attest to that, about having a party, and if everybody had a good time, it was a success, and that couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, you want everybody to come and have a good time because
Absolutely.
but it's also for the deer.
Right.
I mean, that's what we're doing. We're raising money for projects on the ground.
I always told chapters that if you weren't here to do the right thing for mule deer, that it probably wasn't a good fit. And as soon as you explain to them how the program works and how it is that we get money to the ground and with our PRCs and things of that nature.
What's a PRC?
Project Review Committee.
Okay. How does that work?
That is an incredibly important part of our chapter rewards, in that in many of our states, and we're trying to get it developed into each state, we have a project review committee. That committee is made up of the regional director, a representative from the Forest Service, a representative from the local state wildlife agency, and then representatives from our individual chapters.
So it's not just Mule Deer Foundation. There's a broad group of people that are involved in that decision making.
We have representatives from those two agencies, and occasionally BLM. They're harder to get there, but we have them there so that they can help our chapter representatives identify the
most
most
crucial.
important
The most important projects,
that need to be done at the time.
Because there's a lot coming in at various
bet.
times, so
And
you
they're
need to
the
pick what's the
experts.
most right.
Right.
Yeah, and as a former federal biologist, I was involved with quite a few of these project action committees, and it was always amazing to me the amount of work that the volunteers put in to identify those projects, and then came to us to say, hey, how do we work together on this stuff? And to get that out on the ground took a huge cooperative effort, and it was one of the better parts of being a federal biologist, is working with those project action committees.
And the wonderful thing about it is that each chapter gets its own chapter rewards, but during that first year's period, they have the say-so where that money goes. But with a project review committee where we have representatives from all of the chapters that are interested.
It makes the pot bigger.
Exactly.
They
pool their money and
Yes,
say,
pool them.
look, this project isn't in my backyard, but this looks like a really important project. Why don't we put our money towards this project, and they can put their money towards this project, and if everyone agrees on it, we can do a lot more work on a lot larger scale, in that the drainage wide scales, winter range wide scales, or landscape scale projects are much more effective
And you can pull.
for conserving deer than are what I call postage stamp projects, which are important, but typically, a 50-acre or 100-acre project doesn't affect very many deer.
Now, how closely do y'all work with the state fish and game agencies on?
Very close.
Very closely.
They
Very
in a
closely.
lot of cases have final say on the projects we're doing within that state. We have to have their blessing that is a beneficial project to mule deer. They participate on our project review committees or PACs, like you're saying. They have a seat at the table. We're going to spend that money within their state, and a lot of times those guys are the ones bringing us the projects.
Well, and then, as you were talking, the in-kind dollars of volunteerism. So we
Matching
want to
funds.
definitely want to talk about, but then matching funds, because state fish and wildlife agencies bring their Pittman-Robertson federal aid and wildlife restoration funding to projects that they can expand what you guys are bringing to the table through your chapters.
Absolutely. And as an NGO, when we partner with a state or federal agency on a project, oftentimes they're very large projects that if we put in $10,000 into a given project, we can leverage that into a much greater project, because many of their projects have to have a certain percentage
Match,
of
in-kind.
match or
Sure.
in kind.
Yep.
And we can use that to help them do bigger projects.
Well, and that in-kind is really important, because that's what you can bring too, is the hands.
That's
That's
you know,
right.
the
And a lot of
boots on the
times
ground.
There's matching dollars for volunteer hours as well.
Yep.
Now, Randy, there's been a lot of news in the past couple of years about fires, floods, and dead trees in California.
Yes,
How's
there
that
certainly
affecting
has.
our deer out there?
In the short term, many of the fires have been devastating. In that, depending upon where they burned, if they burned in winter areas for migrating deer, it's a problem, because a lot of the mass-producing trees have burned up, and they take a number of years to come back to be producers again. A lot of our brush has been burned that's beneficial to our deer, and now it is being replaced with cheatgrass and Medusa head,
Invasives,
like
yep.
it is in so many other areas. But many of those burns in the long term will be beneficial, quite frankly, because it is rejuvenating the forests, and that's something that needs to happen. We've gotten so far away from our natural fire regimes, at least in California. Most of our habitats are fire-dependent habitats that historically have burned every 15 to 30 years, and many of those now haven't burned for 50 to 80 years, and when they burn
So
now,
they're
they
ripe.
burn very hot. And if you get a very big fire that's very hot, it takes a long time for the habitat to come back. But many of the fires that we have had, in part due to projects that we and other organizations have done, and the governmental agencies where we've done some work for fuels reduction, we've been able to, in some of those cases, have the fires burn in a little more of a mosaic pattern, which is the most beneficial habitat. So many of those areas, I believe, are going to benefit from those fires. It's going to take a little while, but I think in many of the cases it's going to be a benefit. In some cases, it won't be. Just depends on how hot the fire burned and where.
Sure. Well, in a lot of states, where there have been fires, California, Nevada, I know in Idaho as well, some of the Mule Deer Foundation projects have gone to restoration as well, to There's a project that you've been working on, Steve, in Idaho with replanting a burn area, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going into those crucial winter ranges and trying to replant sagebrush and other species like bitterbrush that the deer depend on during the winter in areas that basically is nothing but cheatgrass.
Right, where the invasives came in. So Randy has to get out on the floor. As we said, we are in the middle of the Western Hunting and Conservation Expo, and Randy's got some duties to pull. So we managed to grab Marshall Johnson, another one. Thank you, Randy, for coming in.
Thank you, Randy.
And Marshall is joining us right now. Marshall is the Senior Regional Director for the Dakotas. For the North and South Dakota.
Oh, yeah,
yeah, man. We're glad to have you here, Marshall. Tell us a little bit about, we talked when we started with both Mike and Randy about how they got involved in conservation and Mule Deer Foundation. So tell us a little bit about that for you.
Sure. I grew up hunting mule deer most of my life. I never even shot a whitetail until I was probably about 19 years old. And in North
You
Dakota.
grew up in the Dakotas? Yeah.
I grew up in Bismarck, Mandan area. And just going through my career and stuff, I was in the newspaper industry for about 21 years. And part of the thing with the newspaper industry was that they wanted us to be involved in community stuff. And I was up in Great Falls, Montana, and one of our controllers, he was involved with Ducks Unlimited. And so he got me involved in that. So that was my first experience with a little bit of conservation. Then when I moved to Minneapolis area, I got involved with Ducks Unlimited there as well. Ended up going to Fargo, North Dakota with the newspaper there, and saw in the newspaper that they had a little ad in there saying starting a mule deer chapter. And I'm like, oh, mule deer, I love my mule deer. I hunted whitetail 1 year in Minnesota. I never hunted again. In Minnesota, I always paid the out-of-state fees for mule deer in North Dakota. And so I thought, oh, this is, I've never heard of this. This is great, something I'm really passionate about. And so I got down there, and there was 3 of us. And I became the chapter chair. We started the chapter in Fargo, North Dakota, and we called it the 300-mile chapter because you had to drive 300 miles for good mule deer hunting. But so that was my first experience with it, and I think what really attracted me to the Mule Deer Foundation was the fact of, you guys were talking about that before when I walked in, about the chapter rewards program. It was really frustrating with other organizations. The money just goes, and you try to get things happening in your area, but it may not occur. But with Mule Deer Foundation, I just love that chapter rewards program because we all work so hard. The volunteers work extremely hard, and to have the opportunity to help direct where those funds go, it's just tremendous. And so I did that for 2 years and got transferred to another newspaper in Iowa, and I left the newspaper industry in 2010 and said I'm done with this, and I was going to move back to North Dakota, and I got online to see when the banquet was in Fargo, and I saw this job opportunity thing up there, and I clicked on that, and I'm like, no way. Regional
This is a
director
dream job.
for Dakota. Because I've always wanted to hunt always wanted to work in the hunting, whether it was working for a magazine or being a representative to, Winchester, Remington, or something like that. I've always wanted to be in that industry. And so I called down to the office here, and it was like within 2 weeks, boom, I was hired. And my wife and I, we were kind of debating where to live, and she wanted to go back to North Dakota, and I always thought we were going to go back to Billings. That was our first stop as a married couple, and MDF said, we want you in Montana. So I got my dream. So we moved out to Billings, Montana, and was out there for 8 years or so, 7-8 years, and just recently moved back to my hometown and took on South Dakota then. We hadn't really had any regional director work in that area, and so I volunteered to say, hey, if I move back to be with my family and we've grown Montana big enough, let's expand.
Great. Now, one thing I wanted to talk to you about, I know you have been very effective. You talked about chapter rewards. The 2 things I know, you've had some incredible volunteer projects, and we want to definitely talk about that. But the first thing is fundraising. It's not just about the banquets for you. You've been pretty successful with second events or different types of events, like the Beers for Deer and the Gunapalooza, right?
Yeah,
Tell us about that.
Well, the Beers for Deer, I started out as kind of a second event. It's not a huge money maker or anything. It's just a lot of fun. What I use it primarily for now is marketing.
A recruitment tool.
Recruitment tool, promote an upcoming banquet, kick off the
Drink a little beer.
raffles. Drink some beer. Well,
Drink some beer, talk some deer.
Exactly. But the really neat thing about it is that, as an RD, you're at your banquet and you have people that are passionate and interested in becoming a member. They want to come up and talk to you. you're so busy that you
At a
kind of have
banquet,
to brush
sure.
them off a bit, and that could leave a negative taste in their mouth, you know. And so this is kind of a great way. You're in a nice environment,
Social mixer
social
type.
environment. You have the time to sit down to hear their concerns, what they would like to do. And so I use it more as a marketing tool. We make some money off of it. It's a great way for people to meet. If you do it prior to your banquet, it's a great way to bring in all the volunteers that help at your banquet to get them into
Right,
banquet
and get them
mode
engaged. Sure.
and stuff like
And give
that.
them things to do
Right.
not one time a year.
Right. Yeah, and it does. It keeps us out there and engaged, you know, a
Yep.
couple times a year. The Gunapalooza, I just started that last year. I did the first one
love
in
that name.
Watford City.
Gunapalooza.
Gunapalooza. And in Rapid City, we did it back in November here, and we had such success with it. It's really neat because I only did $100 of advertising.
So what
on
is
Facebook.
it?
That's like a
you-
rapid fire.
It's
Well,
rapid fire. It is. Yeah, literally, I put a.
Well, that sounds a little bit too aggressive. There was no actual firing of guns in these things. No. So
No, the concept is really neat. It's basically like a banquet, but there's no food. And there's no
'Cause the
cost
food-
to get in.
Yeah, because the
It's
food is
generally-
one of the
step back
biggest
just one
costs.
second
Yeah.
and tell them it's generally in an area that you're trying to develop a chapter. You
Right.
don't maybe have a lot of support. You can run it with just one or two people. You're kind of building in that
Right,
area.
right.
It's kind of the first step.
Yeah, it's a great for a second one, again, to keep people engaged
Sure.
that were around.
Absolutely.
And with the chapter reward program, the chapter gets 50% of that net. So anyway, with the Rapid City thing, so what they do is they come in and we have just gun raffles. So I have like a general raffle, but it's 10 guns. And then on each bucket, I got a time when we're going to draw for it. So like every 8 minutes, we're drawing for a gun. In addition, I have a couple other gun raffles going on. I got a membership raffle and things like that. And so, for instance, our doors opened at 5:30. We had people lined up waiting to get in.
Oh,
They get in. We were done by 7:50. 2 hours and 20 minutes
Oh, wow.
later, we gave away 15, 16 guns.
Wow.
Folks were just ecstatic. And so my chapter in Rapid City, we just had a meeting here about 2 weeks ago, and they said, you know what? We have heard so many positive remarks about this thing. We want to step away from the typical banquet. But what we're going to do is we're going to do 4 Gunapaloozas, and our first one's going to be a Megapalooza. and that one's going to be in Rapid City. And then what we're going to do is we're going to offshoot from there. We're going to go to Sturgis. We're going to go to Custer, then back to Rapid City because that's last year's. It was the last day of deer hunting.
Oh, wow.
And middle of the week and that. So it's a really fun event. It's fast, it's clip, and that's what people like. They said you walked in, and people made comments. I walked in 10 minutes later, they're already drawing for guns. And so it was a lot of fun.
That's cool.
Now, Marshall, I have to give you a ton of credit. You got almost a $500,000 grant
Yeah.
to work on projects in North Dakota. Tell us a little bit about that, how you came about, who you're working with, and what's actually going out on the ground.
Right. It's there's a program in North Dakota called the Outdoor Heritage Fund, and that is primarily funded through the oil industry. And what it is, it's basically an opportunity for any of the NGOs, nonprofits, and that to put in for funds to help them, anything to do with recreation, parks, things like that. But it was also for conservation. So what we did is we went in. Ryan Kropp was my regional director at that time, and
Your state director.
He was my
State.
my state chair. And so he and I worked together, and we came up with we wrote the grant, submitted it, and then Ryan actually went and presented. We got denied the first time. So I contacted several people on that board to ask them what we can do to improve it. And so they gave us tips on what we needed to do. And so I think reaching out and talking to those folks really helped a lot because we made some revisions to it, went back in December, and is unanimous. And we got 100%. We asked for $470,000.
And you got the
it was
full amount.
awarded, all of it.
Wow. And how are you using that?
We are using it for on-the-ground work. Specifically what it is, it's working with the mule deer habitat in North Dakota is basically the prime habitats of the first 60 to 100 miles into North Dakota.
From the west.
From the west, from
Correct,
the
yep.
Montana border.
Yep.
That is right in the heart of the Bakken, which is the oil and the energy up there.
Yes.
That's where we need a lot of work to get done. There's not a lot of state land out there. And so there's not a lot of projects. And so what we're doing, we've developed a relationship in North Dakota with the Game and Fish Department in their PLOTS program, which is private land open to sportsmen. It's an access program. And we've been sponsoring a third of each one of those contract agreements that we can afford to do. And so when I first got on over there, we had about 17,000 acres that we sponsored. So what we did is working with the Game and Fish Department, we went out and we said, you know what, let's go together. We're going to go out and talk to these landowners and say, hey, if you get into the PLOTS program, we're willing to work with you to improve your habitat. And by improving their habitat, it's going to improve their grazing productivity as well as it's a benefit to wildlife. And so we've
sportsmen.
And sportsmen, because they get
now
Oh
they
man,
get
I see the bucks that are coming off that part of the
huge.
world. It's
Yeah.
So what's ending up happening is you've got chapters who are able to get involved in actual hands-on projects, fence removal, habitat restoration. You're working with private landowners, so you're building goodwill within the community. And now that's opening it up for sportsmen, so these mule deer volunteers and the general public to have access to these ranches. I mean, it seems like it's a...
Well, not to mention the industry.
And
we have Bobcat, Doosan, we got RDO equipment, we got oil companies all donating, all providing help. Bobcat Doosan, for example, has donated this last year $25,000 value of equipment.
Wow.
To be used on projects.
To be used on the
out there,
projects.
and it's really fun for the
so that
volunteers.
$500,000 is quickly adding up to over $1 million.
Yep.
And
2
you're working
million.
with partner organizations as well, because it's not just so it's really a big collaborative effort. And this is a great example from one state. We've got examples like this all around, but we're running low on time here. What we'd like to do is, for those people who are new to the Mule Deer Foundation or don't have a chapter nearby, let's give them a little bit of information about how they could get involved. If there isn't a chapter, how can they get one started? Or if there's not a potential for a chapter, what can they do to make a difference?
My first suggestion would be to go to the website. You click on a chapter near you. It'll tell you.
What's that website address there?
Muledeer.org. www.muledeer.org.
Muledeer.org.
Yes. Go to a chapter near you. If you don't have one in your in close proximity to where you live, you can call one of the regional directors for that region.
So when you click on your state, it brings up right away
yes.
your regional director with their contact information
Absolutely.
as well as all the chapters and where they're located.
Reach out to him. He'll come to you. We'll set up a
Or
meeting.
her.
Or her.
Or her.
Yeah.
You know,
Excuse me.
some of the greatest volunteers in this organization are women.
Absolutely.
They're very well organized.
We've got a podcast on our women's side here, but so we'll leave that for another discussion. But so they can start a chapter or just get connected with a regional director
maybe they
that way.
want to just attend.
Or
Maybe
they
start
could
by
probably
attending.
possibly just call the office here in Salt Lake and just say, hey,
Be
I'm
redirected.
interested in getting involved.
And we can get them in touch with
Yeah.
the regional director from their area.
Well, with these Gunapaloozas, too, it's working out because I got a family in Washburn, which is 50 miles north of Bismarck. They would like to see an event, but they said, I don't think we could get a banquet or anything in here. But do you have something else? And I mentioned the Gunapalooza, and they're like,
So now
we can do that.
There's a lot more options.
I got a family of 5 here, and I got a couple other friends. Shoot, let's put it on.
And we'd all love to win a gun or two.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Jodi, it's I'm sitting here thinking, you know, we've got 2 senior regional directors, Mike. They're all organically grown within the organization. They all came up, started as someone who was just interested, hunting mule deer, volunteer.
Somebody
up
who is a
through.
volunteer themselves and passionate about mule deer, and really that's all that takes.
I think that speaks a lot of good, positive vibes for this organization and what they can accomplish and, you know, what they're doing for mule deer and black-tailed deer conservation.
Well, one of the things Randy was saying before he left earlier when we were talking was that often it's one person to start a chapter. It's that one person with a passion. And not all the chapters are built the same way. Not all of them can do a big banquet. They can do the Gunapalooza. Or not all of them can do the big habitat. But they want to make a difference. So that one person calling in, checking the website and getting engaged often can just take off like a wildfire, but in a good way.
We actually have chapter. I just started one in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Wow.
Passionate mule deer hunter. He's got several friends that come out west every single year. And that first meeting we had at them, we had 5 guys show up there, and there's 3 that couldn't make it. We got one in Pennsylvania. We got one in Atlanta.
Wow.
Missouri, Kansas.
So it truly is a nationwide organization that's trying to do great
mule
things.
deer hunters are everywhere.
And you know, we need it. I mean, mule deer have definitely needed some help recently. There's a lot. We're going to be talking a lot about that in other podcasts about some of the conservation efforts, but they need an advocate. They need supporters, and that's what Mule Deer Foundation is here for. So, Marshall, Mike, thank you guys very much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks
and
for having us.
For those listeners out there that want to get involved with Mule Deer Foundation, go to their website, www.muledeer.org. Help make a difference with this great American iconic species.
Thanks for talking Mule Deer with Steve Belinda and Jodi Stemler. The Mule Deer Foundation is the only conservation group in North America dedicated to restoring, improving, and protecting mule deer and black-tailed deer and their habitat. MDF is a strong voice for hunters in access, wildlife management, and conservation policy issues. To find out more, visit www.muledeer.org and stay tuned for the next episode of Talking Mule Deer.